December
Good
12th,
morning.
December 12th, 2021. Victoria is with us this week and continue going over the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva. Let's start by setting our intention, aspirations by saying the four immeasurables. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. So we'll do some meditation. I'm going to just read something that I found before we meditate that I really liked. This is from the Karmapa. He said this. In my life, I have had some mixed experiences when it comes to placing my trust in others. On various occasions, the kind of treatment or behavior that I expected from others was not forthcoming. And this has led me to think a good deal about what trust means to me. What I have come to feel is that, first of all, I do not want to make my trust of others contingent on their meeting my expectations of them. I do not want trust to become a bargain or exchange, like two parties entering into a contract. You place your trust in me, so I will place my trust in you. As long as you behave this way, I will continue to trust you. Instead, my trust is a gift that I wish to offer freely. That kind of blew my mind when I read that. Because that's very much in line with the view of Buddhism, and the view, we always talk about interdependence, dependent arising, interconnectedness, emptiness, impermanence, and those things. It also goes into this other reading this is good too. This is also from the Karmapa. We practice Buddha Dharma so that we may not only control our emotions, but eventually work in harmony with our emotions. We practice the Buddha Dharma so that in times of storms, we do not avoid the storms. We do not get carried away by the storms. We simply let them be. Then something beautiful will emerge. The thing about trust is we also have to use wisdom, common sense as well, and not just you place your blind trust in someone who is going to hurt you. You know what I mean? This is not the point of these kind of things, to allow some kind of abuse to happen or put us in the position of being victims. But what it is saying is the openness that he's talking about, and it is something that is in line with the view, because in the ultimate sense of truth, there's no separation. So what are you trusting in? You're not necessarily trusting in another person's decisions and things. You're trusting in the ultimate nature of reality, which is non-duality, and interconnectedness and interdependence. I think it just hit me when I read that, and I think it's something to think about. We can't separate Buddhism from our practice of Buddhism from the view. It can't be isolated into just becoming a nice person or becoming calmer or creating good karma for oneself, things like that. Although those things may be aspects, we get into trouble when we separate those things from the view. We miss the boat kind of Buddhism. There's other ways and other techniques and spiritual practices and spiritual philosophies that, may suit that kind of pursuit better. Buddhism is very demanding in a way. It's very demanding in the way it asks of you to change the way you look at your relationship to the world, really, and to yourself. We may come to it to work on certain defects or certain, to be calmer or to have less stress and meditation. And like I said, those are, there's aspects of that to it, but really, there's a bigger picture. There really is a bigger picture that's, that you can't just extract away. It's not like cherry picking. This works for me and that works for me. Um, it's not really the point. It's missing the boat in a way. So let's meditate, and then we'll turn things over to Victoria, and she can get more into, because she's going to speak of the view as well, which is really, really, really important. Let's start with the 9 purifying breaths. For those of you who don't know this, just try to follow along. I don't want to go into review every single class, because a lot of you, come every week, and it takes up time. So there's other videos on the YouTube, Michael Imperioli meditation, that you could find instructions for this. Let's take that into 9 minutes of meditation. Great. Okay. We'll hear from Victoria's going to continue our study of the 37 Practices of the Bodhisattva by Golgi Togme, which is a very small, condensed text, very, very small actually, but very potent and pithy, as they say. It's the heart practice of our teacher, Garchen Rinpoche. So thanks, Victoria.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, and thank you for joining the study group. And I apologize if I am being redundant, but there are certain things that we always repeat until we really settle them, internalize them completely. So with the previous 7 stanzas, we've concluded the preliminary topics, which are the basis for the main path. From stanza number 8, we enter the main path of the Buddha Dharma. But please, let's keep in mind the preliminaries is what first gives us the view, that which illuminates the ground, the wisdom aspect. The path, the training, is the method aspect, which then realizes the view. We use the method to realize the wisdom. We need both, obviously, for anything successful. So it's like you set a goal or a dream and you go to reality through the method, but you must have the view. Little by little through the view, little by little through training the view, we first absorb and then eventually fully realize it. A fully realized view is what we refer to as Buddhahood. That's what is a Buddha. When the view is fully realized, we attain that state of consciousness, of awareness that is called Buddhahood. It's nothing special, something very hidden, secretive. That's what Buddhahood is. And that happens in stages. A child grows in strength and in wisdom gradually, and no one can change these stages of growth. No one can skip these steps. That is the path, the skillful means. Wisdom and skillful means, in other words, view and the path can never be separated. And they're meaningless, even harmful, if they're misunderstood. If the path doesn't have the view, it can certainly lead us to very difficult areas and even harmful mental states. Mental states which are like poison to us, for example, arrogance and ignorance. So we have to take this very seriously, because Buddhist path is not a fortune cookie, and it's not a meditation feel-good thing, as Michael mentioned before. It's a very, very rigorous training, at the beginning of which we understand that we have a potentiality for full enlightenment. That's the kind of the beginning, encapsulation of the view with which we start the path. If we've not internalized the preliminaries, moving to more advanced practices is really pointless, useless. People practice for many years without any results because they have not absorbed these preliminaries. If the view has not arisen and they have not opened, then they have not opened the door to the authentic practice. They have not understood the relative and the ultimate truth and the union. So what is that? In the preliminaries, we first ponder, we try to understand and then absorb through meditation the impermanent nature of compounded phenomena, including the self. That which we call the self is a compound of a psychophysical compound. It's mental and physical factors, just as all other phenomena. We understand that in both respects, this compound arises, and because it is impermanent, it eventually breaks down and ceases. But we also understand that under the temporary relative aspect of this appearance, there is, at least in us, there is a sky-like awareness that never moves and never changes. And in Buddhism, very often it is compared to the sky or space, which in Tibetan Buddhism, it's the same word. The space is never affected by whatever you place inside it. And yet it is the very condition by which things can arise. Right? If we didn't have space, we couldn't have things in it. Regarding the relative way things arise, we understand the suffering and causes of suffering of samsara. Suffering is caused by two things, namely ignorance in mistaking impermanent, interdependent appearances that arise for truly existing things. And second is our attachment to these temporary appearances and arisings. Because we ourselves, there's a part of us, we ourselves are psychophysical aggregates. We ourselves are temporary as everything else here in samsara. We experience constant physical and mental suffering. Yeah, and as soon as we overcome one suffering, the next one has already arisen. Why? Because in our ordinary mind, delusion, when we take composite impermanent things as real and substantially existent, and we want these composite impermanent things to last, to stay, we want to prolong the states of pleasure, and we want to keep the things that we think provide us that pleasure. But the things change, and we're powerless against this constant wheel of change. That's samsara. And so we experience the change as suffering, you know? Like I said, we always suffer the wrinkles. You know, we want to look really beautiful and young all the time, but no one can stop the wrinkles. There is no stopping it, right? So why do we suffer the inevitable when we already understand it? Even if we obtain temporary states of, you know, peace and pleasure, how long do they really last? So we have to enter the path, really understanding this. The entrance to the path, the opening of the door of the path is saying, okay, I've played this game long enough, and now I'm going to stop. And this portion of my life, I'm going to dedicate to something much more serious. You know, this is kind of like you enter at least early portion of adulthood. How long do these states of pleasure that we chase and dedicate our life to last? They certainly always perish. It's the nature of impermanent, dependent arising. And another word for impermanent, dependent arising is emptiness. Emptiness is not a negation. It's not a mere nothingness. It is a label we put on the nature of interdependence, of cause and result. You know, the whole package that we call karma. Production of temporary things, right? If we truly understand how things arise from multiple causes and conditions only to disperse and cease, we will not be bound to illusory pursuits, squandering our life, chasing cloud after cloud. Because things of this world are very much like clouds. What is the point on hanging on to them or chasing them? How long can we keep the rainbow in the sky, right? If we understand their cloud-like nature, we can enjoy them. We should enjoy them, but we should not be attached with this kind of insane grasping. We should enjoy them and understand they are like rainbows. They're here for a moment. We should love them for what they bring to us into our life, and we should let them go. And then we can have love instead of like suffering when the thing disappears, you know, right before our eyes. So we can choose a path which understands and liberates attachments to these cloud-like appearances. You know, when our mind is not objectifying and chasing something, we can see its completely boundless nature. And we can peek into our own Buddhahood, the basis. Because also chasing constantly, being in constant pursuit of pleasure, you know, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain also never allows us or gives us the time to really look into our nature, the basis of all things, you know, the nature of mind, our sky-like nature. And that is the basis of the Buddha teaching, of the Buddha Dharma, right? We understand the emptiness of the relative phenomena. We understand the compounded self, you know, the conceptual mind, the psychophysical aggregate that we call the self, you know, as a temporary arising. At the same time, we know that there is something underneath it all, which never moves away, never arises, never ceases. Very much what, as I said, you know, in Buddhism is compared to space. If we truly understand these two things, our Buddha nature, the ultimate truth, and the world of impermanence, the relative truth of how things arise and vanish, become empty. And we understand the inseparability of these two truths, the ground and appearance. We have the basis to practice the Dharma. Understanding that Buddhahood is our ultimate nature, we don't have to be sidetracked in this life and wasted by trivial pursuits. We can use our time to practice, right? Instead of just wasting our time. And also, from the previous stanzas, right? That when we die, none of the things we chase after come with us. What comes with us are the imprints of virtuous and unvirtuous action. That's the only stuff that comes. So with the next three stanzas, we enter with the next stanzas, with beginning with the 8, we enter the method. We enter the really not the preliminary, but the actual path of Buddhist practice. We understand something about our ultimate nature, and we understand something about samsara, karma, cause and effect. So number 8 is, the subduer said that all the unbearable suffering of the 3 lower realms is a fruition of wrongdoing. Therefore, never committing negative deeds, even at peril to one's life, is the Bodhisattva's practice. So this stanza consists of rejecting negative actions for fear of suffering, because now a person understands that negative actions always become negative consequences, right? So that is a person that is considered of the smallest capacity, of the lowest capacity. Lowest capacity is when we only understand, the karmic law of cause and effect, and we understand that negative actions beget negative results. That is kind of beginning the entrance into the Buddha path, Buddhahood, Buddha Dharma path. Individual of this capacity has understood that there is no act, no thought that does not leave a trace behind. It is the core teaching of the Buddha. It's the first turning of the wheel, right? That each action has a result and therefore its karmic consequence. Throwing a stone into the pond produces ripple each and every time. It's an infallible law of reality in its relative aspect. Because even though in the ultimate aspect, we say all appearances are empty, nevertheless, we experience suffering and we experience negative results of negative actions. We have heart attacks even in our sleep, in our dream states. So what's the difference? Suffering is suffering and we experience it. This type of individual of the lowest capacity understands infallibility of karma and understands the truth of suffering and the truth of cessation of suffering, understands that virtuous actions and intentions produce the like results, and negative actions and negative intentions produce suffering. This individual has entered the path, but his aspiration is simply to liberate himself from suffering. It's not a vast aspiration. It's not the aspiration, for example, that we take in the beginning of our sessions when we say, may all mother sentient beings, limitless the sky, have happiness, etc., etc. This individual he's just at the very beginning of the path. It's not that he's somehow, limited or small. It's like thinking, the next, this and the next 2 stanzas deal with the 3 levels of individual, the lowest capacity, medium capacity, and the highest capacity. They should not be looked at as static states of where this person is born and he's limited and he's only going to be like this. The next one is, and the third person is like this amazing person. What that means is that, there is emptiness and therefore there is change. So these 3 states are something we all have to go through. It's like a child, then, early adulthood, and then ripe age when there's wisdom. We all will have these. This process is something, it's like being born and, and everything between being born and dying. These steps cannot be erased. No one can skip them. But this individual of the lowest capacity is when we just kind of are dormancy, when we just begin to understand. Stanza number 9. regarding the individual of the middle capacity. The pleasure of the three realms is as fleeting as a dewdrop on the tip of a blade of grass, vanishing in a single moment. Striving for the supreme state of never-changing liberation is the Bodhisattva practice. So, an individual of medium capacity has developed a deeper understanding of emptiness as the nature of all dependent arising. He understands that all these pleasures, we chase through our life are empty. We've done this countless and countless lifetimes. This individual has absorbed, emptiness and the nature of relative phenomena on a much deeper level. And this individual is now really ready to dedicate much more of his life to practice, because he's tired of playing with the little toy cars. This is the individual who says, okay, I'm done with all this. I've eaten this candy, gazillions of times, lifetime and lifetime over again, and now I'm done with that. I'm just gonna, I'll do what I need to do for survival, and the rest of my time I will dedicate to practicing Dharma. And in life, I will be looking at things in their empty aspect. I will curb my attachment to them. I will not be swallowed by, mindless pursuits from, one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, because all these things to him now they clearly appear in the same identical aspect, only to the child, the little cars have they're so different and so distinct. But really they're not. They're all little cars. This individual is ready to move to the next step. This individual understands that there is more than the conventional self, and the life must be used in pursuit of liberation as opposed to wasting time chasing after the same thing in a different wrapper. And what do we mean by liberation? Liberation means freeing yourself from the ties of your emotions and negative actions, because these two things will keep us in samsara forever. Samsara won't end by itself if we keep causing it through our attachment and ignorance and the poisons that arise and the negative acts, which inexorably bring negative karma to crash on us. And that will continue to happen all the time unless we really intervene and stop it. So that's the medium level capacity individual. His intention is more vast. He has a deeper understanding, both of the Buddha nature and of the samsaric element. So he's now kind of like a medium ripened practitioner. And the next stanza is actually one of my very dear to me, because I used to have a recurrent dream of Rinpoche repeating this to me in my sleep. When mothers who have been kind to one since beginningless time are suffering, what's the use of one's own happiness? Therefore, generating the mind of enlightenment in order to liberate limitless sentient beings is the Bodhisattva's practice. This is the stanza of beings of the highest capacity, those who have dissolved the bounds of the self, of clinging and ignorance, and who are now, their level of the path is that they have dissolved this kind of attachment to the self and the, attachment to phenomena in this world. They live for the welfare of all sentient beings, the way that they have realized the view has ripened to that place. So they see all sentient beings as their mothers. And by the way, that phrase, all sentient beings as my mothers, there's an aspect of it which I didn't understand for a long time. That aspect really speaks to the time, the amount of, like a temporal aspect, to the amount of time we have been here in samsara, right? We have been in samsara for such a, infinitely long time that we have brushed and touched every being. That's why we talk about, non-duality. This length of time we have been in samsara. At this time, every being, that has lived and exists now has been our mother. You have to understand that span of time in this way, and not just think about this body right now in this little tiny little, flicker of time. So, these individuals see that, they realize that, they look at all of us and they see us either as their mothers or their children, or, these kinds of, relationships, so they see sentient beings, all sentient beings, as their mothers, because they have realized the immense temporal scale of samsara in what is called the infinite cycle. And they know that they have been related to each and every being. They meditate on emptiness and compassion and seek liberation in order to accomplish the benefit of all beings, not their own benefit. They no longer need to. They don't have a self. They don't need to accomplish their benefit. Their mind is in such a kind of a state of consciousness that's blossomed to that place where self is pretty much abandoned. They may exist among us as our teachers and physical body, but it's like pulling a arrow, shooting an arrow into empty space. There's no target. They will not be hit. There's no clinging. There's no attachment. And the self is only there in that kind of a mode of serving others. So their entire, their existence can be really, can be understood as life of compassion. They live to be compassionate. Their life is compassionate deeds, because they understand everything through this wisdom, which has already liberated all of kind of selfish tendencies and the negativities that, and attachments that come as a result of this ignorant mind. So these are, that level of being, the highest level of being, is what we call a bodhisattva. So that we understand it. So when we start, when Michael, leads you guys in the study group, we start with that aspiration and we end with that aspiration. We also say, may I bring all my mother sentient beings to, beyond the pounding waves of old age, birth, old age, sickness, and death. We wish full liberation for all sentient beings. So even though we're not bodhisattvas right now, in our tradition, we cultivate that vast intention all the time until we physically get there, until our mind ripens into that state. So this is the beginning of the path. So those were the three things that I wanted to just go over quickly with you. And again, as I said, I'm sorry about the redundancy, but it's so very important to kind of always recapitulate before we really start and set a vast intention when we practice the Buddha Dharma.
Thank you very much. That was very, very informative and very clear. So that ends with the 10th. We've been through.
Yeah, that ends with the 10th.
10th.
The 10th is the bodhisattva level of
Yes.
awareness. It's a being who lives, wisdom and compassion are the two aspects of
So
that
number
law.
10. So we've been through the 10 of the 37 as of today.
Yes. Yes. And the next portion I should just mention, the next portion will answer a lot of questions for everyone, because next portion, there's a bunch of stanzas and they're all called taking obstacles on the path. So when difficulties arise, when you ask yourself, what do I do? That whole next section is dedicated exactly to all those kinds of moments, when difficulties arise, all kinds of difficulties. So, just, be patient and, we'll be exploring that very, very soon.
Great. Thank you. Well, let's go to some questions. Let's see. Do you have any advice getting back into meditation after a lapse? Meditation/spiritual routines after a lapse in practice. Also, any advice on how to maintain a practice when you're busy and exhausted. We talk about it a lot. It's like it helps to have a place in your house where you do it all the time, and you make it comfortable, make it inspiring, make it someplace where you want to sit. If it's, you have photos of, some of the Buddha or teachers, or just something inspiring. The more regular you make it, like, you do it after breakfast every day, or you do it before you go to bed, rather than whenever you feel like it. Those things really help. But I think it really has to come from knowing that your thirst for this path has to become, really, really prevalent. It has to really kind of overtake you, that that you can't. It's almost like you need this to breathe, it's like air or food is you're here, doing this class or being part of this because there's a need, there's something in life that you're not, that's not giving you everything you need, right? So you need some kind of practice, some kind of path to really make sense, to really kind of put everything together, to really be fulfilled in some way. So you have to keep that in mind. So what's the alternative is to not have that. The alternative is, it's kind of like what Victoria was saying. It's like, we've tried everything almost, right? You may be successful, you may have a good home life, you may not, or whatever, and you may have at one point, but we've tried all these things, and it's like, you look for fulfillment in this or that, in job, in career, in success, in money, in relationships and stuff, and you realize somewhere at the core is not being kind of satisfied, fulfilled, which is why we go onto a spiritual path. Many of us do. It's more like that motivation has to be at the forefront of your mind. Keep that in mind. So the alternative is this endless wheel of samsara, where you're pursuing different pleasures or different occupations or things that occupy your mind, or things, it's like that endless wheel that never gets quite satisfied, that never kind of comes to rest, So think about that. Keep that in mind. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would say exactly what you said. You need the urgency. The urgency comes through understanding that what I'm doing is just a tiny little, something, and beyond what we need to be comfortable, we have other needs, we have spiritual needs, those needs cannot be fulfilled by worldly things. We all know that. And a lot of times when the spiritual needs are not satisfied, we turn to drugs and booze and other things, or fall into depression. So we have a real existential need for understanding our deeper, nature, and understanding reality in a deeper way. And second thing I would say, what you need is discipline. Like in everything else, if you have diabetes, or some kind of other obstacle, you have to have discipline. Make something regular, stick to it, and you will find real pleasure in it, because it takes time to really habituate and to come to a place where your mind begins to, really understand it and resonate with it. In the beginning, you have to kind of do an imposition, and force yourself to sit down and be disciplined, eat fruits, vegetables, it's like you're trying to cure an illness, and if you have the need for a deeper spiritual life, discipline yourself, experiment with it, just say, for a month, I'm going to just, every morning, I'm going to get up half an hour earlier than I normally do. And I will dedicate that silence and that time to meditation and practice, and see how it goes. But you have yeah, sorry.
What?
You just have to put good things into place by being disciplined.
This seems like a common theme today, exactly this. How do we recognize short-term goals and stay passionate about them when aiming to understand that the level of joy is temporary? The thing we say at the beginning of class is not a short-term goal, and if you're practicing, you should be saying that every time you practice when you start. And what we close with, by this merit, all beings attain the state of enlightenment. Those are not short-term goals. This is why I said, when we say these things, to really look at the vastness of those things. It's not just a formality. It's not just a, it's not a short-term goal, So you're talking about something that's very vast and huge. So try to connect to that more, The level of joy is not temporary. I mean, if you're practicing with that in mind, with that kind of intention, and I'm not sure, it's, if that's bringing you joy by making dedication for the benefit of all beings, that's not a temporary joy. You know what I mean? Victoria was talking about temporary pleasures, like, when the first noble truth, they say in life and suffering, like everything has the nature of suffering, meaning everything that gives you pleasure in the worldly sense is temporary, right? Your loved one is going to die, or you're going to die. You're going to be separated. Something as simple as your house, your home that you love. Eventually, you'll die, or the house will, you'll have to move. Something will break in the house. A tornado can take your house. It has the nature of suffering because of its impermanence. That's why we're making this very vast aspiration to connect to this view of non-duality, which does not have the nature of suffering. Enlightenment doesn't have the nature of suffering. But there definitely is. I mean, because Erin mentioned. Erin last week talked about how she was romanticizing on her old life in America and was missing it and focusing on it. And now she's living in Paris, and she said, or France, I took your advice, decided to do some nice things for others to help. So being of benefit to other beings is a temporary joy that actually has a lot of merit to it, if that makes sense, And it's also, if you can make the aspiration and dedicate the merit of being of benefit to others, then it becomes vast. It's not just about you feeling good that day, if that makes sense. Can you post in the chat the name of the book Victoria read from? Well, we're reading the 37 Practices of the Bodhisattva by Golche Togme. Those are the stanzas. The commentary is, Victoria's commentary. The stanzas are the little, the little things that she's reading and then commentating on. Cultivating discipline, trust, patience. Cultivating discipline. Again, it's exactly what we're talking about, I mean, there's little things we can do to kind of motivate ourselves and to kind of almost trick ourselves into making it regular, making it habit, making it daily. But when we realize kind of the futility and the repetition and the nature of suffering and samsara, if we can really connect to that and use that as a motivation for practice, then you're doing something. Then you're on the right track. That's called renunciation. Renunciation is when you realize that samsaric activities will always lead in suffering, and you'll pursue these things endlessly for countless lives. And, in Buddhist point of view, is that a human life with all the mental and sense faculties that allows you to practice, right? Being in a time and era that the Dharma exists, being in a nation or a country that doesn't prevent you from receiving teachings or somehow, these are circumstances that are very, very precious that allow you to practice Dharma. Not every life, reincarnate life, offers these opportunities. You know, an animal doesn't have the opportunity to practice Dharma, right? Or, you know, you may be born in an age where there is no Dharma, there are no teachings somehow, which that is also a possibility, you know. Or so we have to use that opportunity, which is a rare one in the Buddhist point of view, to practice. And the motivation should come from that revulsion towards this endless cycle of samsaric activity that never brings us, you know, that ultimate level of fulfillment, that, you know, you're always pursuing the next thing, you know.
Drinking salt water.
Drinking salt, you know, when you're thirsty, drinking salt water is the worst thing because it makes you more thirsty. It's the same thing. It's, you know, it's like someone who's, you know, has $100 million, they want $1 billion, you know. It's like, and then they want $1 billion, then they want 4 billion, and they have that much, and then they want to, you know, be, you know, president or something like that. There's nothing enough, you know, amassing enough whatever power or things. I mean, that's an extreme, obviously, version that most of us don't deal with, but it can happen on very small levels, you know, very, very small levels, and we cling to this, you know, pursuit, and years go by and you realize nothing's really changed in a way. We've gotten older. That's, you know, the one thing.
May I only add one more thing?
Yeah.
A very great teacher always used to say to us, it's not the things that bind us, it's the attachments that bind us. So, you know, as Michael and I have been kind of regurgitating forever, that Buddhism is a path that requires tremendous discipline, study, meditation, and all these other components, all of which start with understanding the view. We have to spend a lot of time to understand, you know, we have to have the craving to understand reality, our own and the reality of the world on a deeper level, not just this conventional stuff. You know, we're so happy and always, you know, and so habituated being surrounded by things we completely don't understand. We kind of love living in darkness. It's like if I ask someone, how does your phone work? How does your stove work? How does your TV work? You know, no one knows. I mean, we can press buttons and, you know, achieve, you know, desirable results, but we really, you know, we're so habituated to kind of like live in this kind of perpetual mental darkness. We don't really even have curiosity about how many things that surround us on a daily basis and sustain us, you know, function. But forget about all that small stuff, you know. I think the very, very important thing is we all know that attachments, you know, negative emotions really bind us and make us sick. You know, attachments to those very things that we don't know anything about. You know, we pursue the next iPhone, we pursue the next car, we pursue the next restaurant. You know, and in this perpetual darkness, and we never examine why are we so consumed by these things. So, you know, stepping on the Buddha Dharma path is the first time where you turn around, you know, and you look at that consumptive mind that never stops and just like kind of gnaws on everything like an animal all the time. And you pivot, you turn, and you go, is this really what I'm going to always be? Am I always going to live, you know, chasing after the next thing? Because they're all the same, you know? So stepping on the path of Buddha Dharma has a lot of temporary benefits. You know, first of all, we're like no longer these consumptive animals who are always, you know, victims of their own mental imprints and habits. You know, how when we fall into depression, we have no idea what to do. When we get angry, we don't know how to stop it immediately. You know, when someone is hurting us, we don't know how to react, you know, and smile at that, you know. So those are the temporary benefits, you know, that I just wanted to add. There are a lot of things that we can see immediately when we start training the mind, but we train for much more vast reasons.
How do I not fall into depression over the temporary nature? Does it break your heart less over time? I think depression and heartbreak are two different things. You know, having kind of a sadness in your heart sadness at the suffering in the world and suffering of samsara is actually a good thing. That's an inspiration. That means your heart is, moistening. You know what I mean? It's like, that means that, your heart is softening so you can relate to others in that way and understand the suffering of all beings. Depression is different than that. So you're saying two different things, first of all. How do you not fall into depression over the temporary nature is basically saying that is following the path, because the path that the Buddha taught is exactly the antidote to those things. Temporary nature of this kind of physical thing, but the ultimate nature is non-duality, and that's not a temporary thing, right? And also you can focus on pursuing this path, right? Making aspirations towards enlightenment or things like that is for the benefit of all beings. Buddha became enlightened. His achievement of enlightenment has been of such benefit to all beings, and all the bodhisattvas that have pursued this, it's for the benefit of all beings. It's given us a path. They're able to teach in different forms and in different points in time and stuff like that. So, keep that in mind. And what?
I'd like to speak up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So because the temporary impermanent nature, that's one side of it. We have a beautiful flower and it vanishes. We have a loved one and he dies, but on the other hand, but that's nature of samsara. Everything that's inside it has that expiration label, has that expiration time, including the psychophysical aggregate here. That's why we really have to think, how much time do I have to do this as opposed to this? What should I be doing? Because I will expire. That's inevitable. But the beauty of the fact that things vanish, the beauty of the fact that things change, that means that we can go from this state of mind, a very small mind, the dark mind, to a mind that's illuminated like the sun. If things were static, we couldn't move. We're not like flowers. When we die, the mind doesn't, the nature of the mind, it doesn't. And so, keeping that in mind, instead of just becoming more stagnated, and focus on the attachment to the sadness, because it's a little bit of a choice, working with the feeling, using the energy to understand and carve out like bigger wisdom, bigger discipline, bigger love. The antidote to suffering of depression is giving benefit to others. So, go out and volunteer, do compassionate activity. It will certainly reverse a lot of the damage. Don't stay in that mental state. Reverse it by skillful means. And just remember where you are right now. It's just a little part of the path. The path, the end of the path is Buddhahood. So there's really nothing to cry about. We should all rejoice. We have Buddhahood in our palm. So.
Very good. Yes. Very good. The next two questions from two different people, but they're kind of similar. Do you think it makes sense to be an atheist and a Buddhist at the same time? I don't like religion, but I feel like I need mindfulness and spirituality. Well, Buddhism is not a theistic religion. Buddha was not a god. He's not worshipped as a god. He was, a man, at that time, 2,500 years ago, who, achieved enlightenment and taught a path. He didn't teach Buddhism. He just taught what he experienced and what he learned to people, right? I don't think anything we've been talking about is religious. We're talking about working with our mind. We're talking about trying to see our existence in the world from a different perspective. It's actually much more in line with physics than religion in a way. Many physicists will tell you that the concept of emptiness, like we talk about, how nothing is inherently existing. If we're made up of, elements that are made up of particles, that are made up of waves, we're basically like vibrating energy or something like that. That's reality. That's science, right? Well, what does that mean? And physics very much understands that concept of non-duality. So what's the difference between me vibrating energy and this phone? This is made up of elements that is vibrating energy like I am, as is the ground beneath me. That's not really religious. We're not talking about believing in some creator that made this and made that and wants us to do that. There's none of that. So Buddhism is much more like a science of mind, than anything else. So this goes into the next question. I don't want to cherry pick. What's
Mike,
advice for
may I
someone
add
who benefits? What?
May I add just one more thing to that, please? I'm so sorry to interrupt you, and always keep in mind that we have a conceptual framework for now that we're working with, because that's how our mind operates. At time of enlightenment or getting close to it, you discard everything conceptual. You discard the entire conceptual self, not just the framework of how you look at other things. So keep that in mind. So theism is never an option when you talk about Buddhism.
Right, exactly. So, and like I said, it's not a theistic religion at all. There's no God. There's no creator. There's no omniscient, being that's kind of telling us what to do or, has created everything. But I wanted to connect it to the next question, which is, I don't want to cherry pick. What's your advice for someone who benefits spiritually and emotionally and physically from meditation and these classes? Well, if you're saying meditation and these classes, you're talking about Buddhism, but struggles with belief in reincarnation. I don't disbelieve it, just feel doubt. A lot of people do. But I think you have to remember this. What is being reincarnated? Because in Buddhism, we also talk about the emptiness or the lack of self, that the self is an illusion. What we consider ourselves to be. Who is Michael? Is Michael Victoria's husband? Is he an actor? Is he someone who's doing a meditation class? Is he someone who was born here at this time? These are all things that we impute, that we put, they're based on certain experiences, but there's nothing inherently real about those things. There's nothing permanent about those things. So if there's not there, so think about this. If there's no self, but there's reincarnation, then what is being reincarnated? I mean, I almost try to look at it as if it's like there's this kind of energy field that's somehow connected to us in this form, and which is consciousness, basically. And somehow that is almost recycled into some other form, but carries almost that same charge. Because if you think about it in terms of physics, matter cannot be created or destroyed. So it's not like Michael's going to be reincarnated, and now Michael is in this next form of a cow. But it's not. It's almost like, think of it like this: if you take a candle, right, that's lit, and then you take a candle that's not lit, and you take the unlit candle and you light it with that flame. Now you have two flames. Are they the same flame? Are they different flames? Which one is which? So you don't have to accept reincarnation right away either. You can still, if you're getting stuff out of these teachings and meditation, you can continue. But if you can just keep that in mind, what is being reincarnated, and think about the emptiness, like we talk about, empty of inherent existence, as the definition of the self. That'll help. So we'll continue on 37 Practices of Bodhisattva. Victoria is going to continue on this commentary about this very important teaching. Let's close by dedicating the merit of today's class for the benefit of all beings. By this merit, may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And thank you, Victoria, for
Thank
your
you.
generosity. And for Nick Solidio,
Thank you, Nick.
see you
As
next
always.
week.